I don't want a useless old woman here while I'm pregnant. That's what my daughter-in-law said, right in front of my son. He didn't defend me. He just nodded and said, Mom, maybe it's time you find your own place. In that moment, something inside me went completely quiet. I'd sold my house to help them buy theirs. I paid rent to live in their garage, cooked their meals, cleaned their house, and now I was being told to leave like a stranger. I didn't argue, I just said, fine, I'll be out by Friday. They thought they'd won. They didn't know I'd already started planning my next step, and that soon they'd be the ones answering to me. If you think family should mean respect, not convenience, stay till the end. This story will make you feel every emotion. It was raining that afternoon, the kind of steady rain that makes the house feel smaller and quieter. I was in the kitchen cutting apples for a pie, something I liked to do on days when I didn't have much to look forward to. Amber came in from the living room, her phone in one hand and her other hand resting on her belly. She was 7 months pregnant, moving slower these days, and I thought she was just going to ask if I could make her tea. Instead, without even looking at me, she said, Margaret, I need peace and quiet. I can't live with someone who comments on everything I do. For a second, I didn't even understand what she meant. I kept holding the knife midair, staring at the apples, trying to make sense of her words. Then I looked at her, and something in the way she wouldn't meet my eyes told me this wasn't just a passing comment. A moment later, Ethan walked in. My son. My only son. He looked nervous, like he'd rehearsed what he was about to say. He kept his hands in his pockets and avoided my eyes. Mom, he said carefully, maybe it's time for you to find your own place. We can help with the rent. Somewhere comfortable, just for you. That was the moment it hit me. They were asking me to leave. Not for a few days or a short break, to actually move out. The room felt heavy, like the air had thickened. I looked at both of them and didn't recognize my own child for a second. He couldn't even say it in a way that sounded human. It was like he was reading from a script. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. I just stood there, staring at the floor, hearing the rain against the windows. 6 months earlier, I had sold my house to help them buy this one. That house had been my home for 30 years, the place where I raised Ethan, the place I had every memory of my late husband. When Ethan told me he and Amber had found their dream house but couldn't afford the down payment, I didn't even think twice. I sold mine, handed over most of the money, and told myself it was worth it. It felt good to see him happy. They promised it would be temporary, that I'd live with them until they got on their feet. I believed them because I wanted to. Since then, I had been staying in their converted garage. It wasn't much, but I didn't complain. I cooked meals, did the laundry, kept the place clean. I even paid rent, though they never really needed it. I thought I was helping them build a life. I thought that was what mothers did. But standing there in that kitchen, I realized I wasn't part of their family anymore. I was just an extra person taking up space. Amber finally looked up from her phone, crossed her arms, and said, You said you like being independent. This is your chance to prove it. She said it calmly, like she was doing me a favor. Ethan nodded like he agreed with her, but he still wouldn't look at me. It was like he was ashamed, but not enough to stop. I swallowed hard and tried to find the right words. Part of me wanted to yell, to remind them what I'd done for them, but another part of me knew it wouldn't matter. So I said the only thing I could manage, All right, I'll be out by Friday. My voice didn't shake, and that surprised me. Amber smiled a little, relieved. Ethan looked like he'd just finished something difficult and unpleasant, and now it was over. He said, That's good, Mom. We'll help you find a nice apartment, maybe closer to town. I didn't respond. I just turned back to the counter and started cleaning up. My hands were shaking, but I didn't want them to see that. They stood there for a moment longer, waiting for me to say something, but I didn't. Eventually, they left. I heard them in the living room, laughing softly, probably talking about baby names again. That sound hurt more than anything they'd said. When I finally sat down at the kitchen table, I felt empty. Not angry, not sad, just empty. I looked around at the house I helped pay for. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every wall had something of me in it, but none of it was mine anymore. It was like I'd erased myself without realizing it. Later, I went to my room, the small converted garage they called Mom's space. I sat on the bed and started making a list of what I'd take with me. There wasn't much. Some clothes, a few photos, my sewing machine, a small box of keepsakes from my husband. I thought about where I would go, how much I could afford, how it would feel to start over at 64. I didn't have an answer for any of that. Ethan came by before dinner. He knocked softly, and when I opened the door, he looked like he didn't know what to say. "Mom," he said, don't be upset. It's just better this way. You'll have more space, and so will we. It'll be easier for everyone." I just nodded and said, "I'm not upset. You've made your choice." He looked relieved and walked away. I closed the door behind him and sat back down. I didn't cry. I just sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. I thought about every decision I'd made for that boy. Every time I'd said no to myself so he could have something better. Every night I'd gone without sleep, working overtime just to pay his college tuition. I thought about selling the house, about signing the papers, about watching the moving truck pull away. I thought I was doing the right thing, building something for both of us. But I'd built something that didn't include me. By the time the rain stopped, I'd made another decision. I would leave exactly as they asked. No drama, no fight. But I wouldn't forget this. I wouldn't let anyone make me feel like I didn't belong again. They might think they were pushing me out, but what they didn't know was that they were freeing me too, and that soon things were going to look very different for all of us. That night, I packed 2 boxes and put them by the door. I checked a few papers I had tucked away, property documents, old emails, notes I'd kept, things that might matter later. Then I turned off the light and went to bed. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid. I just felt done. 6 months earlier, I really believed that everything I was doing was for the right reason. I thought helping my son buy a house would finally give him the stability I'd always wanted for him. When I sold my place, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like love. That house had been my home for 30 years, but to me, Ethan's future mattered more than any building or memory. I remember sitting at the bank, signing the papers. The woman across from me asked if I was sure, and I said yes without thinking twice. I was proud of myself. I thought, this is what mothers do. They give their children the life they never had. I even smiled when I walked out. There was no sadness then, just relief. When I handed the check to Ethan later that day, he looked so happy it almost made me cry. "Mom, you're the best," he said, hugging me quickly before running to show Amber. She smiled too, said all the right words, how grateful she was, how much it meant to her, how she'd always take care of me. It sounded nice, and for a moment I believed her. But even as she said it, there was something in her voice that didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way she said, "We'll take care of you," like she was talking about a responsibility instead of family. Or maybe it was just me being sensitive. I pushed the thought away. I told myself I was lucky that my son had someone who loved him, that it didn't matter if we weren't close. A few days later, I packed up what was left of my old life and moved into their new home. I gave them the big rooms, of course. I took the small one at the back. I told them I liked it, that it was cozy. I didn't want to seem like I expected anything. I wanted to make it easy for them to see me as a help, not a burden. The first few weeks were good. I cooked dinner most nights, kept the house clean, and tried to stay out of their way. Amber thanked me often in the beginning. She said she didn't know how she'd manage without me, and I believed her. That made me happy. I wanted to be useful. That was enough. But slowly things changed. Small things at first. Amber started correcting the way I did chores. She said I folded towels wrong, that I used too much salt, that I put the plates in the wrong cabinet. I told myself she was just particular, that she liked things her way. But then she started closing herself off from me. She would talk to her friends in the living room, lower her voice when I came in, and smile politely like I was a guest. I noticed Ethan stayed quiet whenever I mentioned it. He'd say, "Mom, she's just stressed," or "You're reading too much into it." He didn't see that it wasn't about the chores. It was about how I was slowly being pushed to the edge of their life. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just a phase, that things would get better once the baby came. But late at night, I'd lie awake in that small room and listen to them talking in the next room. About the nursery, about vacations, about plans. And my name was never part of those plans. One evening, I overheard Amber telling a friend on the phone that it was hard living with an older person because it made her feel watched. I sat on the bed holding my cup of tea and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I had done everything for them. Sold my house, moved in, cooked, cleaned. And still, I had become the problem. I didn't say anything to Ethan. I didn't want to make him choose sides. But something inside me started to change after that night. I still loved them, but I began to see things more clearly. I wasn't family anymore. I was someone they tolerated out of obligation. When I'd first given Ethan that check, I thought I was giving him security. I thought I was giving him freedom. I didn't realize I was also giving away my place in his life. The more they settled in, the less they needed me. And the less they needed me, the smaller I became in their world. Still, I kept pretending everything was fine. I told my friends I was happy. I told myself it was temporary. I held on to Amber's promise that she'd always take care of me, even though by then I could already feel that promise fading. Looking back, I think the hardest part wasn't losing the house or the money. It was realizing that all those sacrifices, all those late nights working, all the things I gave up, had built a future that didn't include me. I wanted to feel proud, but instead, I felt like I'd traded my security for an empty sentence. We'll take care of you. It's strange how quickly love can turn into distance. One moment, you're the person who makes everything possible, and the next, you're just someone who's in the way. I tried to tell myself it was worth it, that as long as Ethan was happy, I could live with being overlooked. But deep down, I knew something was breaking. If I could go back to that day at the bank, I don't know if I'd do anything differently. Maybe I still would have sold the house. Maybe I still would have written that check. Because that's what mothers do. We keep giving, even when we're running out of things to give. But now, when I think about it, I understand something I didn't before. Love doesn't always come back the way you give it. Sometimes it doesn't come back at all. That's what I learned 6 months before, the day they asked me to leave. Packing took longer than I thought it would. Not because I had much to take, but because every item seemed to carry a memory I wasn't ready to face. I folded my sweaters one by one, the ones Ethan used to help me knit when he was a little boy. He would sit beside me, holding the yarn too tight, making uneven stitches, but proud of every crooked line. I still had one of those old sweaters. I pressed it against my chest for a moment before placing it carefully in the box. There was a small card tucked between 2 books on my nightstand. I hadn't seen it in years. It was a birthday card Ethan made in middle school. On the front, written in messy marker, were the words, "To the best mom." I ran my fingers over the fading letters, tracing each word like it might somehow bring me back to the days when love was simple and certain. I didn't cry. I just felt a kind of quiet ache, deep and steady, like a bruise that never heals. Every time I put something in the box, it felt like another part of my life was being folded away too. The house was quiet that morning. Amber was in the living room, talking on the phone, laughing softly at something someone said. She walked past my open door once, carrying a basket of baby clothes. She didn't look inside. She didn't say a word, just kept walking. I didn't expect her to, but a part of me still wished she would have. Ethan came by a little later. He stood in the doorway, shifting his weight like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to be there. "You don't have to do this today," he said quietly. "You can stay a few more days if you want." I shook my head and smiled a little. "No, it's fine. I said I'd be out by Friday. I'm keeping my word." He looked down at the floor, then back up at me. "I'll call you," he said softly. It wasn't a promise. It was something people say when they don't know what else to say. I looked at him for a moment, really looked. At the tiredness in his eyes, at the guilt sitting just beneath his voice. And I said as gently as I could, "You don't need to, Ethan. Just call me when you actually want to hear the answer." He looked confused at first, then embarrassed, then sad. I turned away before the silence got too heavy. I didn't want to end it in tears. After he left, I taped up the last box and stood there for a while, looking at the small bare room that had been my space. The walls were still white, the same as the day I moved in. I'd kept them that way because I always thought it wasn't worth changing anything in a place that wasn't really mine. Now I was glad I hadn't bothered. I took one last look around, checking the drawers, making sure I hadn't left anything behind. My old sewing kit sat on the desk. I picked it up, held it for a second, then set it back down. It belonged there now. I didn't need it anymore. As I carried the boxes out to the car, I saw Amber again. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, one hand on her belly. She didn't look up when I walked past. For a moment, I thought about saying goodbye, but then I realized there wasn't anything left to say. I loaded the boxes into my old sedan. The seat still smelled faintly of the lavender air freshener I'd always used. I sat there for a minute, both hands on the steering wheel, listening to the sound of the rain starting up again. It was light at first, then heavier, the kind of rain that fills every quiet space with noise. I looked at the front door of the house one last time. I half expected Ethan to come running out to say he'd made a mistake, to ask me to stay, but the door stayed closed. The lights were on inside, warm and yellow, like nothing had changed. I started the car and pulled away slowly. The windshield wipers moved back and forth, keeping time with my heartbeat. Slow, steady, tired. The road was slick, and I drove carefully, not because of the rain, but because I didn't want to rush this moment. Leaving was painful, but it was also necessary. I thought about all the times I'd driven Ethan to school in the same car, the times we'd sung along to the radio, the way he used to wave from the front steps when he was little. Back then, I thought the hardest part of being a mother was letting go. I was wrong. The hardest part is realizing they've already let go of you. I didn't look back again after that. There was no point. The life I'd built, the one I'd tried so hard to hold together, wasn't there anymore. It was just a house with my name erased from it. People think mothers grow old because of time, but that's not true. We grow old when we're no longer needed, when our names are quietly removed from the places that once called us home. The apartment I found wasn't fancy, but it was mine. A small one-bedroom place near downtown Cedar Ridge, with creaky floors and a view of the parking lot. For the first time in months, I could close a door and know that everything behind it belonged to me. No one told me how to fold my laundry. No one told me I was in the way. It was quiet, and that quiet felt like a kind of healing. The first morning there, I woke up early, made coffee, and opened the newspaper that someone had left in the lobby. I'd never been much of a newspaper person before, but something about it felt grounding, like I was trying to build a routine again. I found myself reading the real estate section, not out of interest, but habit. Maybe I was trying to understand how easily people could lose something they'd built their whole life around. That was when I met him, Victor Lane. He was sitting 2 tables away at a small coffee shop called Willow Brew, the kind of place that smelled like roasted beans and quiet conversations. I didn't notice him until he spoke. You always read the real estate section that seriously, or are you in the business? I looked up, a little startled. He was in his mid-40s, confident in the way people are when they're used to being listened to. I smiled politely. No, I'm not in the business, I said. I just understand houses. He raised an eyebrow. Understand them? I folded the paper and set it down. I know what it feels like to lose one. That teaches you more than any textbook ever could. He seemed to think about that for a moment, then nodded slowly. That's fair, he said. I'm Victor Lane. I work in property development. We're starting some new projects around Cedar Ridge. Old neighborhoods mostly. Trying to rebuild, give them new life. I wasn't sure why he was telling me this, but I found myself listening. He talked easily, the way people do when they love what they do. I didn't know anything about zoning or investment, but I knew about people. The kind who built homes and the kind who tore them apart. At some point he noticed I wasn't saying much and smiled. You know, he said, you seem like someone who understands more than she lets on. Ever worked with community projects? We could use someone who knows this town the way you clearly do. I laughed softly. I'm not a professional, Mr. Lane. Call me Victor, he said quickly, and I'm not asking for a professional. I'm asking for someone who knows what makes a neighborhood worth saving. Something about the way he said it made me pause. I wasn't looking for a job. I wasn't even sure I wanted one. But there was something in his offer. Not about money, but about purpose. It had been a long time since anyone had asked for my opinion on anything that mattered. I don't know much about development, I said carefully, but I do know what a good home feels like, and what happens when people forget that. He leaned back, studying me. That's exactly what we need. Someone who remembers what these places mean before we start tearing them down. He handed me his card. Lane Development Group, Community Consultant Opportunities. I turned it over in my hand, reading the name again. So, what exactly would I do? Talk to people, he said simply. Tell us which properties are worth saving, which ones are beyond repair. Help us understand the stories behind them. You'd be surprised how much those stories matter when you're changing a neighborhood. I nodded slowly. And why me? Because, he said, smiling faintly, you read the real estate section like it's personal. Most people just look at prices. I didn't say yes that day, but something about the conversation stayed with me long after I left the cafe. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe my experience, the years, the mistakes, the pain, could still mean something. That night, sitting by my window with a cup of tea, I looked at Victor's card again. I didn't see revenge. I didn't see a plan. I just saw a chance to feel useful again. I wasn't thinking about Ethan or Amber, not really. I was thinking about myself, about the woman I used to be before everything revolved around someone else's life. I called Victor the next morning. Mr. Lane, this is Margaret Shaw, about that community consultant position. I'd like to talk more. He sounded pleased. Call me Victor, he said, and welcome aboard. A week after that meeting at Willow Brew, Victor called and asked if I could stop by his office. I didn't expect much, probably paperwork or introductions. When I arrived, he handed me a folder and smiled. Your first real task, Margaret. 12 properties in Cedar Ridge. We're doing initial evaluations before deciding which ones to approach. I nodded, pretending to be calm. It felt strange, holding something that made me part of a project instead of a problem. I opened the folder and started reading the list, one address at a time. Most were in neighborhoods I didn't know well. Old parts of town with overgrown lawns and forgotten porches. Then I saw it. 59 Willow Creek Road. My hand stopped halfway down the page. For a second, I thought I was seeing things. I blinked, but the address didn't change. It was there, clear as day, printed in black ink right between 57 Maple Grove and 61 Willow Creek. Victor must have noticed because he looked up from his laptop. You okay? I kept my eyes on the paper. Yes, know this one. He leaned back. Oh? Lived nearby? I swallowed hard. No, I live there. He frowned slightly, not in confusion but in interest. You used to live at 59 Willow Creek Road? I nodded slowly. I did. And at one point, I thought I'd die there too. The words came out quieter than I meant them to. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The only sound was the faint hum of his computer and the tapping of the rain against the window. Victor studied my face carefully. If this is uncomfortable for you, I can take it off your list. I shook my head almost immediately. No, I want to keep it. He raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? I'm sure, I said firmly. If anyone should evaluate that house, it's me. I know every wall, every corner, every problem that place hides. He smiled slightly, but not in a mocking way. All right then. Tell me what you remember about it. For a moment, I couldn't answer. My thoughts went back to the smell of coffee in that kitchen, the sound of Ethan's laughter when he and Amber first moved in, the way sunlight used to fall on the living room floor before everything changed. I cleared my throat. It's a good house, I said finally, but it's been neglected. Needs proper maintenance, maybe new plumbing. The garage conversion was never inspected. I know that much. Victor made a note. Unpermitted work? Yes, I said quietly. Definitely. He glanced up. That's helpful. You've got an eye for this already. I gave a small smile. You learn a lot when you've been around homes long enough. He nodded, then said, You know, Margaret, this project isn't just about buildings. It's about giving people chances, people who've been forgotten, or who got stuck in places they couldn't move past. Sometimes a neighborhood needs to change, so its people can, too. I understood what he meant, and I couldn't help but think how fitting it was that this was the neighborhood we were talking about, the one where my life had cracked open. I looked down at the paper again. 59 Willow Creek Road, my son's house. I didn't say that part out loud. Not yet. For the rest of the meeting, I tried to focus on the other addresses, but my mind kept circling back to that one. Every time Victor asked a question, my answers came slower. I kept wondering what this meant. Coincidence? Fate? Or maybe just life's way of reminding me that you never really escape the places that broke you? When the meeting ended, Victor offered to walk me out. As we stood by the glass doors, snow had started to fall outside, small soft flakes against the gray sky. He looked at me curiously. You seem thoughtful. Everything all right? I smiled faintly. Yes. Just thinking about how strange life can be. Sometimes it puts you right back where you started just to see if you've learned anything. He chuckled. That's one way to look at it. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're on this project. You've got insight the rest of us don't. Insight? I asked. He nodded. You understand what a home means before it becomes a number on a file. That's rare. I didn't know what to say, so I just thanked him and walked out into the cold. The snow was falling harder now, and for a moment I just stood there, watching it settle on the street. My breath made small clouds in the air, and I could feel my hands shaking. Not from the cold, but from everything that was flooding back. 6 months ago, I had walked away from that house, thinking I'd close that part of my life forever. Now it was back in front of me, printed neatly in a folder on my new boss's desk. As I walked toward the bus stop, I thought about Ethan and Amber. If they were home, if they were happy, if they ever thought about what they'd done. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they thought I disappeared for good. But life has a way of circling back, sometimes to punish, sometimes to teach, sometimes just to remind you that nothing, not a home, not a relationship, not even pain, lasts forever. I didn't know yet what I was going to do about that address, but I knew I wasn't going to ignore it, not this time. The driveway looked smaller than I remembered. The stones on the path were still uneven. Ethan had promised to fix them, but I guess he never did. Victor parked the car at the curb and glanced at me. "You all right?" he asked. I nodded, though my hands were gripping the folder a little too tightly. "I'm fine," I said quietly. "Let's get this done." We stepped out into the cold afternoon. The house looked exactly the same. The light blue shutters, the front porch, even the small dent on the garage door that Ethan had made backing out too fast one morning. For a second, I almost expected to hear the sound of my old kettle whistling from the kitchen. Victor walked beside me, holding his clipboard. "This one should be straightforward," he said. "Just a basic assessment, structure, value, renovation potential." Straightforward. If only he knew. As we reached the front step, I saw movement through the window. Amber. She froze when she saw me, her hand still holding a mug midair. Her eyes widened, and for a second I thought she might drop it. Then she disappeared from view. A moment later, the door opened. Ethan stood there, wearing a faded sweatshirt and that same look he used to give me when he knew he'd done something wrong. His mouth moved before any sound came out. "Mom?" he finally managed. His voice cracked slightly. I kept my expression calm. "Hello, Ethan." Victor stepped forward, professional as ever. "Mr. Shaw? Good afternoon. I'm Victor Lane, Summit Developments. This is Mrs. Shaw, our community consultant. We're here to conduct a property evaluation for redevelopment consideration." Ethan blinked, trying to process the words. "Redevelopment?" "Yes," Victor said easily. "The city approved a study of this block. We're evaluating homes that may qualify for modernization or acquisition. You were notified, I believe." Amber appeared behind Ethan, pale and tense. "What is this?" she demanded. Is this some kind of joke?" I looked straight at her. My voice was calm even, like I'd practiced it. "No, Amber, this is reality. The same reality you've been pretending doesn't exist." The air seemed to thicken. Ethan's shoulders stiffened. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I glanced briefly at Victor, then back at my son. "My job," I said simply. Amber crossed her arms. "Your job, with the people trying to buy our home?" Victor stepped in smoothly. "Mrs. Shaw is here as a consultant, not a buyer. She helps us understand neighborhood conditions, code compliance, and community sentiment." Amber's eyes flicked between us, anger rising beneath her confusion. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," I said. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have an inspection to complete." Victor, clearly sensing the tension, cleared his throat. "Shall we begin inside? We'll be quick." Ethan hesitated but moved aside. "Sure," he said softly. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. We stepped into the house. The smell hit me first, faint baby powder mixed with the scent of something cooking. It was familiar and strange at the same time. The furniture was mostly the same, except for a crib in the corner of the living room. Victor began walking around, jotting notes. "Built in 1989, he asked. "Yes," I said. 3 bedrooms, 1 converted garage, unpermitted structural work. Amber turned sharply. "You don't know that?" I looked at her. "I do. I was here when it was built." Victor shot me a quick glance, half surprise, half admiration. He kept writing? Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, can we talk privately?" "There's nothing private left to say, Ethan," I said. My tone wasn't cruel, just final. "This is a professional visit." Amber's eyes were shiny with anger. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she said quietly. "You wanted to see us struggle." I met her gaze. "You kicked me out of this house, Amber. You told me I didn't belong here. I believed you. And now I'm here because I do belong to the truth of what this house has become." She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. The silence stretched thin, heavy, like the pause before something breaks. Victor broke it with his calm voice. "Mrs. Shaw," he said, holding out the clipboard, "can you confirm the notes for the garage conversion?" I nodded and took the pen. My hand didn't shake this time. I signed the form slowly, carefully, each letter clear. When I handed it back, I saw Ethan watching me, confusion and guilt mixing on his face. He whispered, "Mom, please, we can fix this." I looked at him, really looked. The boy I raised, the man who had once promised to take care of me. "You can't fix something you chose to break," I said. "Some things don't come back the same way." Amber turned away, muttering, "This is insane." Victor finished his notes and gave her a polite nod. "We'll send the report by Friday. Thank you for your time." We walked to the door. I could feel their eyes on me the whole way. Just before stepping out, I paused and looked around the living room one last time. The same clock still hung above the fireplace, ticking steadily. The same sound I'd listened to 6 months earlier when they told me to leave. That sound, the ticking, filled the silence again, just like before. It felt like the circle closing, quietly, perfectly. Outside, the air was colder. Victor held the door for me and asked softly, "You handled that well. Was it hard?" I took a deep breath. "It used to be," I said. "Now it's just necessary." He nodded. "I can see why you're good at this." I smiled faintly. "You only learn calm when you've already lived through the storm." As we walked back to the car, I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. For the first time, I wasn't the one being left behind. I was the one leaving, by choice, with purpose. I got into the car, signed the last page of the report, and handed it to Victor. "There," I said. "All done." He smiled. "A clean start for everyone, maybe." I looked out the window, watching the clouds gather again. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's just the start of them learning what happens when you forget where you came from." 2 days after the visit, Victor asked me to join him for a follow-up meeting with Ethan and Amber. They requested clarification. He said, "You should be there since you know the property history." I didn't argue, I just nodded. "All right." We met at the house again. The air inside was colder this time, not because of the weather, but because everyone knew what was coming. Amber sat stiffly at the dining table, arms crossed, eyes red from what I assumed had been another sleepless night. Ethan looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from trying to fix something already too far gone. Victor opened his folder. "Thank you both for meeting on short notice," he began, his tone professional. "After our preliminary assessment, we found several issues that could affect compliance. The main concern is the converted garage." Amber shifted in her seat. "What about it?" Victor looked up briefly. "It was converted into a bedroom without a city permit. Structurally, it's fine, but by code, it's not legal. The property can't pass inspection in its current state." Amber went pale. Ethan swallowed hard. "So, what happens now?" Victor's voice remained calm. "You'll need to bring it up to code. That means hiring a licensed contractor, submitting the proper paperwork, and paying the required fees. It's not impossible, just expensive." He paused and looked at me. "Mrs. Shaw, you said you had prior documentation?" I nodded, reached into my bag, and placed a thin folder on the table. I'd kept it all. The emails, the drafts of the permit forms, even the contractor's quote from months ago. I slid the folder across the table toward Ethan. "These," I said quietly, "are the documents I tried to process for you before I moved out." Ethan hesitated before touching it as if it might burn him. "You kept this?" "I did," I said. "I thought it might be useful one day." Amber's voice cracked. "Why would you even bother keeping that?" I looked at her. "Because I once believed we were family, and family keeps records, especially of the things they were never allowed to finish." The silence that followed was sharp enough to hurt. Victor cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "For context," he said gently, "Mrs. Shaw's documentation matches what we found in our database. The city already issued a notice about this 6 months ago. It was never resolved." Amber stared at Ethan. "You didn't tell me about that?" He ran a hand over his face. "I didn't think it mattered then. I thought Mom had handled it." I watched the two of them, confusion, frustration, blame, the same cycle I'd seen so many times before. "I offered to handle it," I said, "but no one wanted to listen." Ethan turned to me, his voice trembling. "Why didn't you just tell us it was serious?" I did, I said simply. You just didn't want to hear it from me. Amber slammed her hand on the table. This is insane. You're acting like we meant for any of this to happen. I leaned forward slightly. You didn't mean it, Amber, but you meant every word you said to me the day you threw me out. You told me I was a burden, that I needed to stop interfering. So I did. I stopped. No one spoke after that. The ticking of the kitchen clock, that same familiar sound, filled the silence again. Victor finally closed his folder. I'll give you both a week to decide, he said. Either bring the structure up to code or consider the redevelopment offer. I can't extend beyond that. He stood up, gathering his notes. Thank you for your time. When he left, the three of us stayed seated. Amber stared at the table, eyes unfocused. Ethan kept rubbing the edge of the folder with his thumb. After a while, I said quietly, You have everything you need right there. It's not too late to fix it, if you're willing to do the work. Ethan looked up at me. Mom, are you helping us? Or teaching us a lesson? I met his eyes. Sometimes those are the same thing. Then I stood and walked to the door. Behind me, no one followed. That night, the rain didn't stop. It fell hard against the windows, the kind of steady sound that fills every corner of the room. I was sitting in my chair, reading, when my phone started ringing. It was Ethan. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. I could already guess why he was calling. I almost didn't pick up, but something inside me, the same instinct that never fully stops being a mother, made me answer. Mom. His voice came through, shaky, rushed. They said the city's going to cancel the whole redevelopment if we don't fix the garage. We don't have the money. I don't know what to do. You must know someone who can help. I didn't say anything right away. I listened to the rain hitting the glass. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed awake worrying about him, the bills, his future, the choices he made, all those nights he didn't even know about. Mom, he said again, voice small this time, please. I took a slow breath. Ethan, I said quietly, you're the homeowner now. You wanted independence. This is part of it. There was a long silence. I could hear his breath hitch on the other end. So, you're not going to help? I'm not going to fix something you broke by choice, I said. That's not help. That's enabling. He didn't respond. Just silence and the faint sound of his wife crying somewhere behind him. Then the line went dead. I set the phone down. I thought that would be the end of it. But an hour later, someone started knocking on my door. At first, I ignored it. The rain was still pouring outside, and whoever it was could wait. But the knocking didn't stop. It got louder, faster, desperate. I got up and went to the door. Through the peephole, I saw her. Amber. She was soaked through, her raincoat clinging to her like another layer of skin. Her hair was plastered to her face. For a second, I almost didn't recognize her. The proud, polished woman who used to make me feel small. I opened the door, but I didn't invite her in. The rain and the hallway light met halfway, painting her face in silver streaks. Please, she said, her voice trembling. Please, Mrs. Shaw, I know you don't owe us anything, but I'm begging you. We're losing everything. I was wrong, I was scared, and I said terrible things. Her words came out between shaky breaths, half drowned by the sound of rain. I looked at her for a long moment. You're not scared of losing your home? I said finally. You're scared of losing control. There's a difference. Amber shook her head. No, it's not like that. It is, I said. When you threw me out, it wasn't because you needed space. It was because you wanted to prove you were in charge. You wanted everything your way. Now that the ground's falling out from under you, suddenly I matter again. Her shoulders sagged. The words hit her like something physical. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said, voice cracking. I just wanted peace in the house. I thought you'd be happier somewhere else. I took a step closer to the doorway, but didn't cross it. You thought wrong, I said. Peace doesn't come from pushing people away. It comes from learning how to live with them. The rain grew louder. It filled every pause between our words. Amber's lips trembled. Please, I'll do anything. I'll pay you back. Just tell us what to do. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was the voice of someone who had learned. But I'd heard too many apologies that came only when consequences arrived. You'll figure it out, I said quietly. You and Ethan. You're adults now. You made your choices and will now live with them. her eyes filled with tears that mixed with the rain already running down her face. "So that's it? You're just going to watch us fall apart?" I looked at her. This young woman who had taken my place in my own home, who now stood on my doorstep like the rain had washed away everything she once was. "I'm not watching," I said softly. "I'm letting go." Amber's knees gave out. She sank to the ground, her hands clutching at the wet steps. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I didn't move. My hand was still on the door, and for a second I felt something twist inside me, the old instinct to comfort, to forgive, to fix. But I stopped myself. Some lessons had to stay learned. I closed the door slowly. The sound of it clicking shut was soft, but final. Through the wood I could still hear her crying, her voice mixing with the rain. I stood there for a while, listening, until the sound faded, swallowed by the storm outside. Then I turned off the lights and went back to my chair. The rain kept falling, steady and endless, like it had no plans to stop. It was late morning when the knock came. Not frantic this time, just firm and deliberate. When I opened the door, I didn't see Amber or Ethan. Instead, I found two older faces I hadn't seen since the wedding. "Mrs. Shaw," Harold Lewis said, tipping his hat slightly. His wife, Diane, stood beside him, clutching her purse like it was something that might anchor her. "Mr. and Mrs. Lewis," I said, surprised. "It's been a while?" Diane smiled awkwardly. "It has. May we come in?" I stepped aside. They entered quietly, polite but uncomfortable, the way people are when they know they're walking into something heavy. I poured coffee out of habit. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd bought secondhand when I first moved here. Harold cleared his throat. "We heard there's been, trouble. Amber called us. She's very upset." "Upset tends to happen when actions have consequences," I said evenly. He sighed, his eyes tired but sharp. "Look, I know things got out of hand. Families fight, misunderstandings happen. We just came to see if there's any way to clear this up before it gets worse." Diane leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Amber told us you've been working with some developer, that it's all a misunderstanding. She said you were hurt and wanted to teach them a lesson." I looked at her for a long moment before standing up. "A misunderstanding," I repeated softly. "That's one way to put it." I walked to my desk and opened the drawer. From the bottom, I pulled out a brown envelope, the one I'd kept sealed since the day I left their house. I set it down on the table, sliding it toward Harold. "Read this." He frowned and opened it. Inside were copies of my correspondence with the city's building department, the permit applications, the inspection notice, and the contractor's estimate I had arranged before everything fell apart. "This is from 5 months ago," Harold said, scanning the pages. "Yes," I replied. I was already handling the garage conversion issue back then. All they had to do was let me finish, but instead they told me to leave, because I was inconvenient. Diane's hand went to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears as she looked at the official seal on the letter from the Department of Building Safety. "Oh, Margaret," she whispered, "she didn't tell us any of this. She made it sound like you wanted revenge." I shook my head slowly. "No, I wanted compliance. I wanted peace. The revenge came later, not because I wanted it, but because they earned it." Harold sat back in his chair, jaw tight. He stared at the documents for a long time, then let out a long breath through his nose. We raised her to take responsibility. Somewhere along the way, she learned how to hide from it instead. Diane reached across the table and touched my hand. "I'm so sorry, truly. You didn't deserve what she did to you." I gave a small, tired smile. "It's not about deserving, Diane. It's about learning. Some lessons cost more than others." She nodded, wiping at her tears. Harold, however, looked furious. Not at me, but at his daughter. "Mrs. Shaw," he said finally, his tone low but steady, "you have my word. This won't go unanswered. My daughter will face what she's done, and she'll make it right." I met his gaze and saw something sincere there, something I'd long stopped expecting from that side of the family. Accountability. "That's between you and her," I said. "I've already made my peace." He nodded firmly. "Maybe, but she needs to learn what peace costs when you destroy someone else's." Diane sniffled, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "We'll talk to her. We'll make sure she understands. I wish she'd listened to you sooner." I took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth ground me. We all think we have time to make things right, until the time runs out. No one spoke after that. The ticking clock in my small kitchen filled the silence, that same steady sound that had followed me through every stage of this mess. After a moment, Harold stood and extended his hand. "Thank you for showing us this," he said. "You won't hear excuses from us, just resolution." I shook his hand. That's all anyone can ask for. They left quietly. Through the window, I watched them walk to their car, Diane leaning into her husband's arm for support. When the car disappeared down the street, I looked at the envelope still sitting open on my table. The papers inside were damp from Diane's tears. I closed it carefully and put it back in the drawer. It was midweek when the city came knocking again, this time not for a permit, but for answers. The woman who showed up at my door couldn't have been older than 30. She had sharp eyes, a calm tone, and a badge clipped to her belt. "Mrs. Shaw, Detective Mia Alvarez, City Compliance Division. We're reviewing a complaint regarding Summit Developments and their acquisition methods." I invited her in. "I've been expecting this," I said. She smiled faintly. "You have nothing to worry about. It's routine. Someone filed a claim that Summit pressured homeowners into selling." "Let me guess," I said softly. "Amber or her father?" She flipped a page in her notebook. "Frankly, ma'am, I'm not supposed to say. But yes, the complaint came from the Lewis family." I nodded. "Then I'm glad you came. You'll hear everything, exactly as it happened." We sat at my kitchen table, the same one that had seen too many hard conversations lately. She turned on a small recorder. "Can you describe your involvement with Summit?" "I was hired as a community consultant," I said evenly. "My role was to identify properties that needed updating or had compliance risks. The city had already issued notices for several homes, including my son's. I didn't create the problem. I just stopped covering it up." Mia looked up from her notes. "Your son's property? That's personal." "It was," I said, "until they made it clear I was no longer part of the family. After that, it was just another address on a list." There was no anger in my voice, just fact. Years of being dismissed had stripped the emotion out of certain memories. She asked for emails, phone records, copies of my reports. I handed them over, everything neatly organized. I'd learned long ago that paperwork speaks louder than emotion. Mia reviewed the documents for a while, then looked at me again. "Mrs. Shaw, were you aware your son's in-laws accused Summit of using inside information?" "I was," I said. "But inside information only exists when someone has something to hide. Everything I shared with Summit came directly from city records." She studied me for a moment as if trying to decide whether I was the calculating type or just a woman who'd been pushed too far. "Can I ask something off the record?" she said. "Go ahead." "Most people in your position would have tried to get even. You don't sound angry." I smiled slightly. "Anger doesn't change anything. I've already lost what mattered most. All that's left now is clarity, and that's something no one can take away." Mia nodded, closing her notebook. "Thank you, Mrs. Shaw. That's all I need." 2 days later, the city released its findings. The investigation was complete. No evidence of coercion, no unlawful practices, no conflict of interest. Summit was cleared. So was I. When the letter came, I read it twice. Not out of disbelief, but because the words felt like air after being underwater too long. That evening, my phone rang. It was Victor. "Congratulations," he said, his voice lighter than usual. "The city wrapped up the investigation. You're officially clean." "I didn't realize I was dirty," I said with a small laugh. He chuckled. "You know what I mean. You handled it with grace. Most people would have yelled or fought. You just waited it out. I've learned that truth has its own timing," I said. He paused, then said, "You just proved something, Margaret, that justice can wear a dress and speak softly and still be the strongest voice in the room." I smiled, looking out the window at the streetlights flickering on. "Justice doesn't need to shout," I said. "It just needs someone willing to stand still while everyone else pushes." He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "You're remarkable, you know that." "I'm just tired," I said. "But thank you, Victor." After we hung up, I sat by the window, the letter from the city still open beside me. For the first time in a long while, I felt still. Not victorious, not bitter, just still. It had been almost 2 weeks since the city cleared me. Life had settled back into its quiet rhythm. Morning coffee, small walks, the sound of the clock filling my apartment like a heartbeat. I thought that part of my life was over. Then, one afternoon, someone knocked on the door. When I opened it, I saw them. Ethan and Amber stood there, both thinner, older somehow, the kind of change that doesn't come from time but from worry. Amber's eyes were red and swollen. Ethan looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Mom," he said softly. I didn't move aside. "You can come in," I said after a moment and turned toward the kitchen. I heard the door close behind them, then the sound of their wet shoes on the floor. We sat at the table, the same table where I'd shared coffee with the investigator, the same one that had heard too much truth lately. No one spoke at first. The silence hung heavy, thicker than words could cut through. Amber was the first to speak. "I told my parents everything," she said, her voice shaking. "I told them I lied. I said you left because you refused to share space for the baby. I made you sound selfish." Her eyes filled again. "They know the truth now. They saw the letters. They know what I did." Ethan's voice was hoarse. "Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve to ask. I just couldn't live without saying I was wrong." I looked at both of them, and for a moment I couldn't speak either. The room felt smaller, the air thick with everything that had gone unsaid for too long. Finally, I said quietly, "No one deserves forgiveness, Ethan. People just learn how to earn it." Amber wiped her face with her sleeve. "We've lost everything," she said. "The house, it's gone. We signed the papers yesterday." I nodded slowly. "Then it's done." Ethan leaned forward. "It's not about the house anymore. It's about what we did to you, the way we treated you, the things we said." I stared down at my hands for a while before answering. "Do you know what hurt the most? It wasn't the words. It was that you believed them. You believed I was a burden. After everything, after raising you alone, after giving up the only home I had, you believed that I didn't belong in yours." Ethan's eyes filled, but he didn't speak. Amber reached for his hand and he gripped it tightly, like he was holding on to something fragile. Amber said softly, "If you don't help us now, we'll have nowhere to go." I met her eyes. "Then consider that your tuition," I said. "I spent my whole life paying for yours." She flinched, tears spilling over. "I deserve that," she whispered. I sighed. "You deserve to learn. That's all any of us can do." The silence stretched again. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed faintly, then faded into the hum of the city. Ethan spoke next. "Mom, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make this right. I promise." I shook my head gently. "You can't make it right, Ethan. You can only live differently from now on. That's what change is. Not an apology, but a pattern." Amber's breathing hitched. "I thought I was strong," she said. "But I see now, strength isn't about control. It's about respect." I looked at her. "That's the first true thing I've ever heard you say." She gave a small broken smile. "Then maybe it's not too late." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure what I felt, sadness, relief, or just exhaustion. All I knew was that the anger had finally burned itself out, leaving something quieter behind. Amber stood and walked around the table. Her hand trembled as she reached for mine. I didn't move at first, but when her fingers closed around mine, I didn't pull away either. Her skin was cold, trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. "For everything." I nodded slowly. "I know." Behind her, Ethan stood, his eyes shining. He reached out, covering both our hands with his. "We don't expect you to forget," he said. "We just hope one day we can earn a place in your life again." For a moment, I let the warmth of their hands sink in. It felt both foreign and familiar, like touching something I'd lost a long time ago. Then I gently pulled my hand back. "You'll both figure it out," I said softly. "Together, just don't make the same mistake twice." Amber nodded, tears running freely now. She took Ethan's hand in hers again, holding it tight, and that's when she broke, her sobs coming out in gasps she couldn't control. I stood and turned away, walking toward the window so they wouldn't see. I watched the light fade behind the buildings outside, my reflection faint in the glass. For the first time in a long while, I felt a tear fall down my cheek. Quiet, uninvited, but honest. I didn't wipe it away. Behind me, I heard them stand. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. "Goodbye, Mom," Ethan said quietly. "Goodbye," I replied. The door closed gently. The apartment was silent again. I stood there for a long time, staring at my reflection, the woman who had been thrown away, who had learned to stand alone and who finally understood what forgiveness really meant. A year passed. Seasons changed, the city moved on, and so did we, each in our own way. Ethan and Amber had sold the big house months ago and found a smaller one on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, nothing perfect, just enough for the three of them. For the first time in years, I didn't feel dread when I thought of visiting. They invited me for dinner on a quiet Sunday evening. Amber had written the message herself. "We'd love to have you over, Mom." No occasion, just dinner. I almost said no. Old wounds have their own reflexes. But something inside me whispered that maybe this was what healing was supposed to look like. Not forgetting, not pretending, but simply showing up again. When I arrived, the porch light was on. Ethan opened the door, smiling nervously like a boy again. "Mom," he said softly, "you look good." Amber came out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Dinner's almost ready," she said. Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't run away from mine. The smell hit me before I reached the table. Chicken stew, slow cooked with carrots and thyme. My recipe. I hadn't made it since I left their house. We sat together at a small wooden table, the kind that made everything feel closer. Ethan lit a candle in the center, its flame trembling just enough to remind me how fragile peace can be. Amber poured me tea. "I hope it tastes right," she said. "I followed your notes exactly." I took a bite. The flavor was there, soft, warm, familiar. It tasted like memory, like home. "It's perfect," I said. Amber smiled, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't look forced. Dinner was quiet, but not heavy. We talked about small things, the baby's sleep schedule, Ethan's new job, how cold the winter had been. No one mentioned the past directly, but it was there, sitting quietly with us, no longer sharp, just present. Halfway through the meal, the baby began to fuss. Amber picked her up and placed her gently in my lap. "She wants her grandma," she said softly. I looked down at the little girl, soft cheeks, big, curious eyes, fingers that gripped mine like I was something solid in a world she didn't understand yet. "What's her name?" I asked, though I already knew. Amber's smile wavered, tears pooling in her eyes. "Maggie," she said, "after you." Something inside me cracked open, slow and quiet. Ethan's hand found mine on the table. "We wanted her to carry the best part of you," he said, "the part we almost lost." For a moment, no one spoke. The candle flickered, the baby cooed softly, and I felt tears slide down my cheeks, not from pain this time, but from something gentler. The baby looked up at me, eyes wide, and made a small sound. Her mouth opened around a word she didn't quite understand but said with all her tiny might. "Gamma." I laughed, then cried at the same time. "That's me, sweetheart," I whispered. "That's me." Amber reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you for coming," she said, "and for not giving up on us, even when we deserved it." I shook my head. "I did give up, Amber, but giving up isn't the same as hating. I just needed to stop bleeding before I could reach out again." She nodded slowly. "I understand." We sat there a while longer, just breathing the same air. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and the baby's small sounds, and for the first time I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I felt like part of something again, not because they needed me, but because they finally saw me. After dinner, Ethan walked me to the door. Outside, the night was cold, but the air was clean. "We're still learning," he said quietly. "So am I," I replied. He smiled faintly. "Will you come by again next week?" I thought about it, then nodded. "Yes, I think I will." As I walked down the small path toward my car, I glanced back through the window. The candle still burned on the table, light shimmering over 3 faces. My son, his wife, and the baby named after me. The flame flickered, then steadied. I stood there for a moment longer, memorizing the sight. Not because I was afraid it would fade, but because I finally knew I could let it live without fear. It had been another winter. The city looked softer under the first snow, like even the streets were tired and ready to rest. I was back working with Victor again. After everything that happened, he still called from time to time, asking if I wanted to consult on a few new projects. I said yes, not because I needed the money, but because I liked the routine. It gave me something to do, somewhere to be, someone to talk to. That morning we were reviewing property reports in his office when he looked up from the papers and said, "You know, Margaret, you've changed how I look at things." I smiled. How's that? He leaned back in his chair. You made me realize justice isn't just in contracts or city codes. It's in people, in how they face what's done to them. I thought for a moment before answering. Justice isn't always about getting even. Sometimes it's just knowing when to stop helping those who take you for granted. He nodded slowly. That sounds like peace. Maybe it is, I said. We finished our meeting quietly after that. When I left his office, the air outside was sharp with cold. I pulled my coat tighter and walked the few blocks to my apartment. Snowflakes were falling heavier now, melting against my skin before I could feel them. Inside, the radiator hummed softly, filling the silence with warmth. I made myself tea, the way I always did. 1 spoon of honey, no sugar. Then I sat by the window, my favorite place in the world now. From where I sat, I could see the streetlights flickering through the snowfall. The world looked peaceful, muffled, as if all the noise had finally decided to rest. Somewhere in the distance I heard laughter, small, bright, familiar. It was Maggie. Amber and Ethan were visiting the park nearby, letting her play in the snow for the first time. Her laugh reached me through the glass, faint but clear. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. It was strange how that sound, just one child's laughter, could quiet everything else inside. I thought about all that had happened. The betrayal, the loneliness, the nights I spent wondering if I'd made a mistake standing my ground. I hadn't. Pain had its place. It taught me where my limits were and what I was worth. For a long time, I believed strength meant staying no matter how much it hurt. But now I understood. Real strength is walking away and still being kind when you're called back. The kettle clicked off again, even though the tea had gone cold. I smiled at the sound. Life had found its balance. I had my work, my peace, and a little girl who said gamma every time she saw me. That was enough. I looked out the window again, the snow still falling, slow and steady, covering everything old, everything broken, with quiet forgiveness. And I thought, maybe that's what justice really is. Not payback, not revenge, just the ability to sit alone, hear laughter in the distance, and know you've made it to the other side of anger,